Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be joining us today. Welcome back to DDP Podcast. Once again, another wonderful segment we have for today. Joining me today is Mr. Jacob Stensdal, who has insisted that I only call him Jacob throughout the entire episode. I'm so excited to have a conversation with you today. He's the Deputy Head of the Mission of Denmark and here at the Royal Danish Embassy, and the embassy also covers Denmark's bilateral relations with Angola, Botswana, Eswatini, Lesotho, Mozambique, Namibia, Zambia and Zimbabwe. Jacob has previously held the positions of political and press advisor at Invest in Denmark and senior advisor on, help me with this one, is it Mashrek?
The Mashrek region, yes.
Okay, whatever that is, in the Middle East and North Africa Department in Copenhagen. He was also previously posted as a special advisor on development and trade to the Danish Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia, and has been working with the Danish Embassy and Deepening Democracy Programme in Uganda. Jacob holds a Master's in Political Sciences from the University of
Aarhus University
Denmark, and he is married and has 3 wonderful children. Thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
No, thank you very much, Janka, and thank you for coming to the Royal Danish Embassy. I'm doing great. I'm very excited for this podcast. So thank you for coming.
Awesome. Just for a quick contextualization, the 2024 elections are coming up, and I'm jumping right into the meat of things. The 2024 elections are coming up, and for the first time in a really long time, I think the South African environment leading up to the 2024 elections is feeling mobilized long before 2024 actually arrives. One thinks that the political campaigns only start in 2023, but the different pressures that South Africans have been going through, especially since the pandemic, have been placing people in positions where they're like, we need an election now and today, and it must happen immediately. It's like 2024 cannot wait to come here, right? And a big speculation that a lot of political analysts have and projections that they have is that it is unlikely that the 2024 elections for the ANC government will have them gaining their usual 50% majority. If anything, all the projections and the polls are showing that they will be scoring just about 48% in terms of the votes for 2024, which inevitably would be leading the country into moving towards a coalition state. What are your views on that? Do you agree with the projections in the capacity that you're allowed to obviously speak about this particular context?
Oh, thank you, Janka, and thank you for that question. I think, it's interesting also to note that the electorate in Denmark also between elections sometimes sort of request that elections are being called for. So it's not only in South Africa that there's this very active electorate anticipating the next election that will take place in 2024 in South Africa. So Denmark, just by way of background, really has a long tradition with coalition governance, and that is a result of the fact that we have a proportional representation electoral system, a PR system, very similar to the one we have in South Africa. And the sort of usual outcome of a PR system is that you will have a number of political parties represented in your parliament, and none of them would normally be able to mobilize more than 50% of the votes. So in Denmark, we've had that system for more than 100 years, and for more than 100 years, we haven't had a single party with an absolute majority in parliament. And therefore, we have a very, very long tradition and history of working with political coalitions and sort of in a multi-party space and making things happen despite that the parties have different positions, opinions. In South Africa, of course, South Africa has been experiencing 28 years now of democracy that have been a bit different from what you normally see in a PR system, in the sense that we have had one political party, the ANC, having an absolute majority throughout the democratic era of South Africa. Whether that will be changing in 2024, well, it's difficult to predict. We don't know. But of course, we are very keen from our side, the Danish embassy side and the Danish government side, to share some of our experiences and lessons learned, both the positive and the negative, in order for South Africa to prepare for the day that coalitions are a reality, and at least at national level, but we also see that already at local level, at municipal level. I think 66 councils are being run through a coalition setup. Our main notion from the Danish embassy side is not that it's a question of whether you like coalitions or not. And we see that very much in the public discourse in South Africa. That is the question that's being asked, and for good reason. A lot of people and part of the electorate is expressing some negative views towards coalitions because they've seen the challenges and the instability that coalitions have led to in a certain number of municipalities. To us, the question is really, how can we make coalitions work for the benefit of the people and for the benefit of public service delivery? And that's really what we are very keen to sort of engage in from our side.
I'm glad that you just touched on the uncertainties that people have with coalition governments. I think it's understandable from the South African perspective, where your status quo for the past 28 years has been one majority party having basically the ruling of the state, etc. But I think that the discontent, particularly from the South African perspective with coalition governments, has been the experiences that we've had with coalition governments at the local government level, have people feeling as though, how can we expect it to be good at a national level when it's already, so to speak, being screwed up at a local government level? And particularly because the local government level is the one that technically deals directly with the people, unlike, the executives on the other end. And so that produces that sense of there will be some sort of lack of peace and instability that comes with coalition governments. Do you think that that is a true statement? Or do you think that peace and stability can be achieved within local governments?
So I definitely think that peace and stability can be achieved. But I also think it's fair to say that the first experiences with coalition governance in South Africa has proven to be difficult. So coalition governance is not something you just do from one day to the other. It's in a way, it's an art, really, a political art, in terms of building a culture where political parties work together in a constructive way based on certain principles or norms, either written or unwritten. And that takes time to develop. And that's also why the more you engage and the more we can from our side, the Danish embassy side, can engage in this public discussion and share some of our experiences, the higher the chances are that this culture will develop. Coalition governance comes with some very clear advantages in its best form, at least, because it brings along with it a higher degree of accountability, in the sense that you have more political parties represented in a governance structure that can hold each other accountable. There will be more eyes on the purse, and you will have to sort of make sure that you govern in a way where all the political parties in the coalition can sort of see themselves in that. And the other thing is, of course, you also have a higher degree of representation, because you have political parties representing different segments of society in this coalition structure. So sort of from an electorate perspective, you will have a higher degree of a representation of a broader spectrum of your populace or your electorate. And that's some very strong advantages in a democracy, and also for bringing about good governance.
I just want to take this conversation then on a macro level. Given the fact that our world outside of politics is continuously becoming more and more polarized, It is a situation of you are either this or you are that. And if you are this, you cannot be that. If you are that, you cannot be this. I was in a conversation recently with Dr. Jackie Silliers and with the African Institute of Security Affairs and their different projections that they made this wonderful graph of showing the different scenarios of somewhat of a sustainable world, a world that has got stagnant growth, a world that is super polarized, and a world that goes through war. Does coalition governments, particularly in the world of polarization, because projections within that is that the more the world becomes polarized, the easier it is for populist groups to rise up and come through. Do you think that, just in general, coalition states have got the ability to deal with the continued polarization and its effects that can come thereof, including populism?
So again, a very good question. I'll answer the question from the basis that I am a deliberate optimist. So I'll look at it sort of from that lens, really.
Yeah.
Because of course you would probably also be able to make the opposite argument that what I'm going to make, that of course it will just create more chaos and discord in society. But if we apply the optimistic view on this, which I actually also personally believe in, then coalition government has the potential to create more social cohesion in a society. Because the political parties at the highest level would have to come together, they would have to compromise, they would have to find a common interest, a national interest in many ways, and would have to work together. And if you are working in a coalition setup, you cannot defect, you cannot break the trust of the other political parties, because then you're not considered reliable, and then you'll not be included in that coalition. So some of these principles that should form the basis of coalition governance can also hopefully materialize in a higher degree of social cohesion. So Denmark is a very mono-ethnic society. It's very different from South Africa in that sense, and we have to recognize that. You cannot just transfer our experiences to South Africa, but some of them you can translate at least. And one of the things you can hopefully translate is that party politics cannot be based on sort of enemy pictures and animosity. Of course, you will have that in campaigns where the political parties try to sort of distinguish themselves from each other. But once the electorate has spoken, once you sit down in parliament, you have to work for the better of the country. And that is only by engaging in constructive dialogue across the political spectrum and find a common ground where you can have a majority of MPs voting for that particular position. And that hasn't been necessary really in South Africa for the past 28 years, because you have, again, one political party with an absolute majority. So a lot of the things that are sort of leading to legislation and final political decisions is processes going on within a political party, but not across a political party spectrum. So bring it more out in the open, across the political parties. They can disagree in the open, but that creates also an interaction that could potentially be beneficial to South Africa's cohesion.
No, I think what you're speaking to is, if we go back to like political philosophy, is the idea of plurality within multiculturalistic societies. Because it's been proven in true and tested that you cannot force some sense of assimilation, or you cannot force nations to only have the perspective of one body. There will always be one that will want their own recognition, etc. That's like identity politics stuff on the side. But at the core of plurality politics is the idea of understanding that there are differences, but moving past those differences to find what you're saying now, those common interests. And ironically, that is the healthiest form of democracy. For some reason, I feel like the world is moving towards thinking that democracy has to have some sense of homogeneity and people only thinking in one way or another, as I've mentioned, when in fact a healthy democracy is one that is creating a safe space for compromise, for difference, for conflict sometimes. And it's very important then for political parties and even potentially independent candidates with the new electoral reform acts that have been passed through to come to that common ground. But again, you're the optimist, maybe I'm the pessimist over here. In order to get to that common ground, particularly here in South Africa, how do we get there when the starting base, before we can even reach accountability, is this minefield of corruption that has people not even believing that democracy is a system worth fighting for and risks the undermining of whatever government might come through in 2024?
So I didn't do too well in my university studies on the history of ideas and philosophy. So I'm more of a practical person. So I have some limitations in terms of answering that question. But what I will say is, though, that what is important in a multi-party system is the trust between the key actors. So that is the trust between the political parties and the leaders of the political parties. And what I'll say to that is that the Danish Embassy, together with the University of Cape Town, hosted a study tour to Denmark some 3 months ago, where we had the privilege of having 8 of the biggest political parties in South Africa participating, some very prominent politicians. And what we experienced during the visit, besides the fact that they were really sort of constructively engaged in discussions with the Danish counterparts, was also how they interacted together in the group in Denmark across the 8 political parties, and how they had a genuine sort of interest in understanding each other's political positions. And that's definitely what needs to take, we need to have more of, I believe, in South Africa as well, that interaction across the political spectrum between key figures that can then build trust, a personal trust relation. That is such a strong force in any type of governance and knitting a governance coalition together.
I think then just my last question. Now, this is maybe your role as the work that you guys are doing here in the embassy. What role does coalition governance play when it comes to foreign affairs and engaging with foreign policy?
That's a very good question. It doesn't play an individual or sort of discernible role, I would say, but of course it depends on it's a case by case scenario, really, depending what are the dynamics in a political party coalition structure and stuff like that. But again, it plays at least the sort of role for us as Denmark in South Africa, that we have the experience with coalition governance at national, at regional, and at local level. And if we can in any way offer any valuable inputs to the process that South Africa is going through the ECS, then we would be very honored and very happy to share that. And of course, we recognize that we are we're basically a guest in this country, and there are some very, all the dynamics are working independently of what we do as a small player. But if we can somehow stimulate discussions or inspire the political arena with some of our experiences, then that would be great.
All right, Jacob, thank you so much then for this stimulating discussion. I really enjoyed it, and I enjoyed your insight on this particular conversation. I think, for some reason, when you read media, coalition sounds like this scary word and almost the sense of doom that, is going to come for our country. But just on the optimistic note, I do think that our democracy is healthy, even though it has its little weaknesses at the moment. It is healthy in ensuring that transition, should it be a coalition government state, at least we know that our constitution protects that type of formation for it to actually happen. But I think you're absolutely right on the importance of trust building from within the political parties themselves, but also in terms of what they do on the ground for people to see the fruition of it. Let's just hope maybe we'll have those political parties listening to this podcast.
Yeah, and if you can just pick on what you say there, that might be the last point, but trust between the political parties was something I alluded to. But of course, as a political party, you also need to build trust to the people, to the constituencies and the people. And the best way to build trust is to deliver on your promises and make sure that the public service works and public service delivery is reaching the people. And again, that is a very natural platform for political parties to come together and say, okay, how do we make the different services work? We are in this together, and then sort of form a joint alliance or a joint coalition working towards that objective, because that should be the basis when we come together, say, okay, how can we improve the country? How can we improve the social service delivery to the people? And of course, there'll be different suggestions in terms of how you do it.
Yeah.
But if you always have that end goal in sight, then that's a good start at least.
Yeah, no, definitely. Being true to what it means to be a public servant is what I think actually makes it work. Jacob, thank you so much for this conversation. And to our DDP listeners, thank you so much for tuning in for this one as well. We really do appreciate it. With that being said, I think I'll see you guys again in our next podcast. Again, Jacob, thank you so much.
Thank you, Anka.